is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. The gig economy, it's taking over. You know, Uber, Lyft, jobs, or gigs. We're kind of self-employed, but not really. As Peter Giles points out in his book entitled, Driving Undercover, Lies, Promises, and Deception, My Uber Story. He was one of the first Uber drivers when the company rolled into South Florida, and he was fascinated by Uber's business model, if not at times perplexed. Explain.
The book attempts to explain from a basic level, because a lot of people would read about the gig economy and how it's giving them the freedom to work anywhere, anytime, which is all good. But I don't know if anybody has written about how it really affects their lives when you're in it. So my book is about looking at it from a basic level. Not only it allows you to have the freedom to work anywhere, anytime, but it comes with the challenges as well.
As you point out, it enabled people like Uber and Lyft to infiltrate our economy and become successful very quickly.
One of the things that is glaringly in this new economy is the insecurities that still goes with it, right? One, there's a fine line between being an employee and being an independent contractor. And that's being challenged in every city and every state in the U.S. For instance, when I was working for Uber, they told you had to wait for the customer to call, and then they tell you where to go, when to go, depending on the route. So you're still subjected to time of work, where you'll go to find work. And at the same time, if you have a number of cancellations, then you're penalized for that. So you're still restricted. You still come under that compliance regulations from the company, but at the same time, they want you to be an independent contractor. So there's always this fine line between employee and independent contractor status. In terms of Uber, it was always a complicated relationship, because in the early days in Uber, they were still fighting with the city, county, and all the regulatory departments to get into those cities. But they did it the other way around, recruited the drivers, right? More or less started operating in most cities without permission, and at the same time started negotiations with the city. So the drivers were up against not only the situation where they have to position themselves at near to airports and stuff so they can get riders, but they were also illegally doing that. And that was what happened in Fort Myers here. When we were out there, we were always on the lookout for the airport police. We were always lookout for the sheriff, security in parking lots when we were in parking lots, because we were not allowed to operate. And which goes to show how big companies like Uber, because there's no proper regulations, they bully themselves into the marketplace without impunity. The business model is a tremendous success, because there is a demand for such services. So Uber zeroed in on an opportunity, which, gladly so, but it was done in a way that it caught everyone on guard by surprise. The regulatory agencies did not know how to respond to such an opportunity and a business model, that they were playing catch up all the time.
Right.
So Uber and Lyft, they were dictating the terms, both from an operational level and a compliance level. But at the same time, they know they had to get a foothold into the marketplace, so they use their drivers to make that happen. This book, I'm hoping that this book opened the eyes of a lot of people, not only drivers and riders, but operators in the new gig economy,
right,
to realize that they should have a level playing field, and all stakeholders should be part of this new gig economy that would benefit all.
Share the wealth, right? Thanks, Peter. You think you're safe till you're not, right? Isn't that how it works? Everything's fine till it's not. As Terry Haney found out, he did a lot of traveling while he was working in international marketing, and it was during one of those trips that he found himself asking, how safe are we really here in the USA? The question led him to write his book. It is entitled Implied Fear. Terry.
Before 9/11, and I was in South Africa, and a friend down there who had just been here said, "You live in a really safe country." And I said, "Well, look around you. This is fine here too. He says, no, just pay attention. And I looked, and everywhere you went in, there were guards, there were gates. And he says, you always have to look around, look over your shoulder because something can happen at any time. And to me, that was a novel idea because we'd always lived here, not thinking about stuff like that. Then after 9/11, it became very real here. We had the same situation. So the premise was we were naive, and now we're finding that a threat doesn't even exactly have to be real. If it's an implied threat, it can still have a serious consequence on our lives. Then I wasn't even thinking about writing a book until I was listening to a radio guy in San Francisco said, if you have an important idea that you want people to know about, write about it. And that was in the middle of the night when I was driving down the freeway. And yes, he's right. Because I had this story in my mind of how this could play out. So I need to make it into a book so people can find out about it and live the same kind of thing. So that's actually what started the process. The other things that started the process was just thinking about what kind of a situation could cause a lot of panic and not even be real. That's the kind of the idea of the implied fear. Some are real and some aren't threats.
Right. So you came up with a San Diego-based FBI agent?
Yes.
His name is Gary Hayes. He's a former Marine.
Right. And his wife and daughter were murdered, and they don't know why, blown up in his car because they had taken his car to SeaWorld. And they believed it has something to do with his prosecution of the drug lords that they were doing in San Diego at the time, but they never could prove it. So that's hanging through the whole story. He gets brought to FBI headquarters. They have a tip out of Paris that somebody wants to give them some information about something that's going to happen in San Diego. So he goes there to the Banlieue, which is the bad section of the northern suburbs of Paris, which is a very scary place. I had to go there so I could describe it. And police won't go there. And it's where the Arabs have been stuck for several generations, and the French won't let them assimilate into society, but they can't go home. He gets the information from the mother, is actually the wife of the terrorist that's causing the trouble, and she's ratting on him because he beats her. So he's got somebody to chase, a guy named Farid Chakra, who's masquerading as a naturalized Mexican in America. And it goes into the corruption of both the California DMV and the Social Security system, and how they work and how they can get identification for these terrorists to make them think that they were American citizens. And they're cultivating marijuana money in the Northern California in the marijuana farms, but they're keeping it in California, and that's where the money is being spent. And there's 4 nuclear bombs were stolen from the Air Force. Now he's chasing them. And one of them is underneath the San Diego ballpark.
Oh my gosh. What an imagination you have, sir.
Well, I was a nuclear weapons specialist in the Air Force. So I had to be careful. I had to look up, make sure I could find stuff on the internet before I could talk about it. But it was just the idea, and the story is that in some cases the threat's real, some cases it's not. There's 3 or 4 different locations that he has to go to. Oh. And then at the end, it takes a complete total twist.
Ooh, good one, Terry. You know what? This feels like an episode of Homeland. Good luck. Kathleen Killian is a healthcare executive and college professor in the midst of a career change. She says writing is her cathartic alter ego. It allows her to exercise her creative side. A child advocate in healthcare, she was inspired to write a children's book entitled Harmony and the Healthy Heart Fish, a follow-up to a book she wrote 10 years ago.
I mean, I love kids. Unfortunately, I was not able to have children. And in healthcare, I've witnessed quite a few children being bullied. The suicide rates are climbing, and I think we're kind of at an epidemic, if you will, crescendo relative to, self-esteem lows and bullying. So I try to create colorful, fun allegories and characters to get across some messaging in a really benign way to engage teachers and students and parents to talk about issues that are a little bit challenging. Harmony is a fish, but she's invisible. The only individuals that can see her are children, and her role in the ocean is to remind all the creatures in the sea how special they are. And she wants the children of the world to carry that message outside on land. And so she visits their toes when they put their feet in water, in the ocean, in rivers. And she represents herself through the bubbles that are touching the kids' toes, just as a reminder that they're all very special. So it's an allegory, and it's a lesson in really looking at the different creatures. The blobfish is known to be the ugliest fish in the sea, but he can swim the deepest of any other fish. And so he's very special because of that. The sunfish is noticed and has a reputation of being the fattest fish, but the sunfish can bake on the top of the ocean and can be as large as a car. So there's just subtle lessons about people's perceptions of you and us, and really digging deep to find what's unique about each of these characters.
Do you go out and talk about your book?
I do. I always like to include a writing exercise and a drawing exercise. It's almost like art therapy that kind of cracks open the opportunity for discussion, and the children, K through 12th grade, and I've even worked with adults, really connect when they're using multiple senses, and the stories just bubble out of them. So for Harmony, the exercise is write down what makes you special, and also write down what makes your family special. And I use the seahorse in the allegory because the seahorse, I don't know if you know this, but their eyes, they can see forward and backward at the same time. But the male seahorses are the ones that carry the babies. So I'm just putting my toe in the water just to open a dialogue about how every family is different. And the complexion of the nuclear family is very different and diverse. And that's what makes them special. So it's not only about talking about the individual child, but it's also having them feel okay about their unique family setup, if you will.
So what children have been able to get their hands on this book?
Yes, actually, I'm an alumni of St. Louis University. That's where I got my physical therapy degree. They're really interested in bringing some academic experts together to really raise the issue about self-esteem for children and young adults, and also the incidence of suicide and cyberbullying and how that dynamic is really escalating. I'm a graduate of Bishop Eustace Prep in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and they're willing and really excited about the same opportunity. Unfortunately, this subject matter is on everybody's radar. And if we can just have a healthy discussion using fun, colorful characters to break the ice, I think it's going to be good for us all.
Is this part of a series?
It could be. It could very well be. I feel like I have more in me, but this is what bubbled up, and it took me a year to write. I had all the characters in my head, so I knew exactly what I wanted them to look like. And it's been a really fun journey.
That's great to hear, Kathleen. I mean, what's the point if you can't enjoy the ride? All right, we got to take a quick break, but we're coming right back. This is the Page Publishing Book Club.
Have you written a book and want to get it published? Then now's the time to call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099 and do it immediately. You see, they're looking for authors of all types of books, and unlike most publishers, Page Publishing will take the time to review most of the books submitted to them, and they'll even give you their feedback. And if they like what they read, Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, the Apple iTunes Store, and other outlets. They'll handle everything: copyright protection, printing, cover art, publicity, and editing. So if you've written a novel, a children's book, a cookbook, inspirational work, a book of poetry, or biography, and want to get it published, then you need to call Page Publishing and do it immediately. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. Your road to fame and fortune could very well start with this simple phone call. For your free author submission kit, call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099.
I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. You are back with the Page Publishing Book Club and William T. Vick. He ran 3 businesses, sold them off, and decided to pay attention to his enthusiasm, really a passion for World War II. The result is his first published book entitled Identical Opposites, Book 1 of the Apocalypse Trilogy.
Well, it's set in the eve of World War II when Wild Bill Donovan recruited a couple of boys out of West Point. They were identical twins in looks and features and everything except personalities, and were total opposites. He sent one to Berlin to assist in the defection of a German scientist and his family. And he was the good twin, and it talks about his life and over in Germany and falling in love with a girl, and then her family gets entrapped by the Gestapo trying to defect. And then he hooks up with Morton Vorman, who, of course, is a real character, and tries to work out a way to get her released from prison. The other twin goes to Europe, but he's different. He is kind of a loose end and becomes an assassin. And of course, he was assassin for the OSS, but he also did some freelance work and killed some people on his own while in Europe. He was kind of the bad twin, so to speak. And it just takes their lives and a lot of historical facts and dates and features and characters is real life. I actually researched it, and they're actually historically correct. And then I inserted the two twins and then some other characters to add some color to the novel.
So it's a piece of historical fiction.
That is correct, yes. My father-in-law, who's deceased, was a captain, was actually a burgomaster in Germany right after the war. And he really kind of got me interested in all this, started telling me some of the stories about the German people and what he saw over in, post-war Germany. But, of course, all this identical opposite happens either in pre-war or right at the start of World War II. But that's where it really got started. And then I've always been a World War II buff, really enjoyed history in college, and just kind of, started researching it and took all these facts and events and then built my fictional characters around them.
That must have been so interesting to do.
It really was. The research was just phenomenal. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of hours looking this stuff up, and of course, you learn when you write something like this. I learned a lot, and immensely. It's a lot of hard work, but it's quite satisfying and fulfilling to finally finish it. Looking back, I really didn't know where to end book one, Identical Opposites, before book two, Beware the Assassin, started. So I had to pick a spot in there. I just, quite honestly, continuously wrote all three of them and then broke them into three books because they're all three long. They're all over 400 pages. So, you have to pick an ending somewhere. Or it would have been War and Peace otherwise.
Yeah, right. This is Identical Opposites, book one of the Apocalypse trilogy. Why the Apocalypse trilogy?
If you have to read book three to understand the apocalypse part of it.
Oh, okay.
Where it all ends. In Identical Opposites, book one is setting the stage for the other two books, quite honestly.
So I guess it must end with a bang, right?
Literally. Really, the moral of the story is, even in war, true love can be found and people can care about the others, even when they're on opposite sides. And people are people, and yes, war changes a lot, but at the same time, there's hope, even in wartime, that people and sides can get along.
Well, I sure hope so. William, great book. Thank you. Sarah House is a special ed assistant for 18 to 21-year-olds. She takes notes at work, when she dreams, various times throughout the day. And the next thing she knew, she saw her thoughts taking shape. And she had a book she thinks will teach us all some valuable lessons. The name of it, Inclined to Love. So you didn't plan this, huh?
All of a sudden, the story kind of came out. And it just kept coming. It just kept coming. I was like, man, this is going to be really, really long, so I better break it up. So I have two other sequels to this current book. It's about a young girl who's about 16. Her name's Eliza. She is in a car accident on Highway 26 in Oregon, coming home from the airport, and they get smashed into the Meridian by a semi-truck. And she's the only survivor. She loses her parents and her sister. And she's in a foster home in Newberg, Oregon. And so she's trying to figure out why God would let this happen to her. Things that she didn't know about kind of creep up. Because she's in a foster home, her aunt's the only living relative. So her aunt wants her because she inherited what her parents had won in the lottery. And her aunt wants the money. She's only 16. So she has to have a guardian, and the people that she's living with, they have 3 of their own kids, plus they have 2 or 3 other foster kids living in the home. And the foster parents just want her to be their daughter. They don't want anything from her. They just want to love her and help her through everything that she's gone through. She ends up in a relationship with a young man, and something happens with him and he ends up with a traumatic brain injury. And because of my line of work, I kind of know how that goes. And he has issues that she is having a hard time dealing with, and she ends up having to break up with him. And that's another thing that she has to deal with.
Do you see people dealing with this kind of thing?
I hadn't really seen a whole lot until I started almost 3 years ago at my new job. I'm still in the school district in Hillsboro, but now that I'm working with adults that are still in the system till they're 21, I'm seeing a whole lot more of what could be stories like this.
So maybe that's subconsciously what inspired you.
Me myself, I have a learning disability. It's dyslexia. And the fact that I could pick up certain books and really start to read them because they were printed right, that's another thing that inspired me. Is that, wow, I can read this and it doesn't float off the page. And then I was like, wow, I could write a book. And then all of a sudden this story kind of popped into my head.
Oh, okay. Does the story work itself out? Is there a positive message?
There is. And it's just having patience with the person and getting them to realize that they do actually have something wrong. Maybe the young man in the story that has the traumatic brain injury doesn't even realize, what he's doing is wrong because that's just part of the brain injury. Like he'll say something or do something and then it's all about grief later. Nothing is realized when it happens. It's always after the fact. That there's I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that kind of thing.
And that's not uncommon with brain injury?
No.
Wow.
No.
Well, thanks for the insight, Sarah. Finally, Tim Brewer does computer support tech for the state of Wyoming, and he's been writing since about the 3rd grade, but never, seriously. Then he lost someone close to him, and he was inspired, dare I say possessed, to write his book entitled The Shrouded. Tim.
Some friends and we were doing some fantasy role playing, and this adventure kind of started in that. One of my best friends, he passed away suddenly, and we kind of, we went through the funeral and moving on, and then this story popped into my head, and I figured, okay, this sounds fun. So I wrote it as a little short story, intending it to be kind of a tribute to Steve. So I got to a certain point in it, and I thought, it's done. It's a nice little short story, and I'll just leave it here. And it apparently wasn't. It would not leave me alone. I am firmly convinced that it was Steve's ghost driving me to finish the story and turn it into a book. So I did. Pieces of story just kept coming to me, and it just wouldn't quit. So I just kept writing, and there it is.
What killed him?
He was very overweight. He got pneumonia, and his lungs couldn't lift the weight anymore, and pneumonia just wiped him out.
Oh, jeez.
It's a fantasy novel. It's about a group of young people who have started to learn forbidden magics and forbidden talents, and they find themselves thrust into really an old conflict, and they are in a huge rush because the forces of evil are sweeping across the land, and it's destroying everything. It's like a giant plague, and they are really under a lot of pressure to try to save something or find some resolution. So they're rushing about trying to find what's going on and try to put a stop to it. And through the course of the story, they learn a lot of things and eventually do find the person who has started sort of the local infestation on their island and put a stop to him. In the meantime, they also some larger things afoot, and there are other things going on, and they then move on to see if they can deal with that. Move on to the next stage, and that's going to be in the second book.
Okay, so I'm reading about demonic creatures eating anyone who survives the blight.
Yes.
Eating toward the Western Shores province, to the armies of the hated Wytherian Church.
The hated,
and they're looking for a tiny band of starved youngsters that wield ancient forbidden powers.
Yeah, the church has long dominated the island and has forbidden the practice of magic. But these kids learn it anyway. One of the two people in the original battle for the island finds them and takes them to the old school where they used to train people with special ability. And it's currently still haunted by the ghosts, basically the professors who used to work there. And these ghosts teach them the forbidden arts, and who they call the Tinker, who they all think was just a maker of pots and pans and fixer of clocks. He takes them there and arranges that for them to get training, and he's training them to be the new force to fight the evil that is sweeping across the land. And they get sort of thrust into things before they're really ready, but they quickly adapt and confront the forces.
And Steve has inspired you to keep this thing
Yes.
going to the point where now you're going to write another book.
Yes,
It's like you're possessed.
yes, in a way, yeah. The island in the story is kind of haunted and possessed, and in a way, so am I.
Ooh, Tim. Hey, you know what? Whatever gets you moving, and sometimes, not all the time, it takes something dramatic to compel us to move forward. In this case, to write our thoughts, our experiences, our heartache, our trauma, whatever it is, whatever's going on in your life, get it down on paper. And as you heard tonight, you never know what it's going to be or when the inspiration might hit you. But when it does, you got to be ready. I say get a recorder. That's what I say. I mean, I'm a reporter. That's what I would say. Just talk into it. Let your consciousness flow, and then you can listen back and put it all together. Okay, that's it. That's all we got for this edition of the Page Publishing Book Club. Remember, you can find us anytime you want at 710WOR.com. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. I'm out of here.